Hello, and welcome to She Leads Biotech, the podcast that celebrates the achievements of women in the bioscience space. I'm your host, Sharon Cox, CEO and Managing Director of CNA International, a boutique search firm based in New York. Each week, I have the privilege of learning from incredible leaders as they share their stories. Together, we celebrate their triumphs, explore their challenges, and uncover their vision for the future of bioscience. Our conversations also provide invaluable insights into how women can unlock their unique superpowers and succeed on their own terms. So, whether you're just starting your journey in bioscience, contemplating your next career move, or simply passionate about science and innovation, this podcast is here to empower, inspire, and guide you. My guest today had no desire growing up to be CEO of a biotech company. She excelled at all things sporty. And in order to earn money to fund those activities, she took a job as a campus research assistant, only to go on to be a trailblazer in the field of AAV gene therapy. She also turned the challenges of COVID to her advantage. Her passion for the science is palpable, and she's also really, really good at finding funding. So please join me in welcoming CEO of SIREN Biotechnology, Dr. Nicole Paulk. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday.
Appreciate you taking the time out to talk to me. You're over on the West Coast, right?
Indeed, San Francisco.
Ah, very nice indeed. So you have an interesting background, which I'm very keen to dive into. But I know that you're the CEO, founder, president of SIREN, and we'll obviously get to talk about your work with them. But how did it all start for you? What made you choose the field you're in, and what was your sort of journey towards that looking like?
Yeah, the plan was never to be a CEO out in biotech. The plan was always, I guess it depends on when you asked me. If you had asked me 10 years ago, the plan was absolutely to be in academia, and that's what I went and did. If you had asked me before that, what was the plan? I would have been like, I'm going to be a professional athlete. If you had asked me before that, what was my plan? I don't think I would have had a clue in the world. So it depends on what phase of my life you asked me. But this was never like the plan since I was a child. And I always told my parents I'm going to be the CEO of a biotech company. I grew up in a small farming town. Homework was not the priority. It was very much sports. So most of my feedback from my parents was please overachieve, but not necessarily scholastically. It was very much around kind of sports and those types of things. And so for better or for worse, and I think probably for better, that was very much instilled in me the importance of sports and kind of being a team player and participating in these team sports, which I think fast forward probably ended up helping me to become a CEO. But that was the focus forever. It was very much like you need to be on varsity and you need to be the team captain and you need to be the MVP. And you need to help this gaggle of girls, rise together on all of the various team sports that I played. You name it, I was on just about any sport.
I was going to say, which one did you do? But
soccer,
obviously,
to volleyball, to baseball, to track and field, and those were the ones I did the most on. But just about everything else, I probably also did at some point as well, but just not as intensely. So that was the focus for a really long time, and then. In undergrad, I had a full ride, but it still didn't provide me enough for sports. I didn't have enough money still to necessarily like pay for myself to have a car to like go to practice and these types of things. So I needed to earn a little extra money, but I couldn't really leave campus because I needed to be there all hours of all days to train.
Yeah.
I was like, well, what if I got a job on campus? And really the only two jobs on campus were like, make sandwiches at the sandwich station in the cafeteria, or get a research job on campus from a faculty member who happened to have grant money to support students doing paid research rather than research for credits. And there were two faculty members on campus that had grants that could actually pay students in cash money as opposed to research credits. And the only one that was kind of science-based was a woman named Anna Johansson, who was in the biochemistry department, and she worked on atmospheric nanochemistry, which is a fancy word for like the very unique chemistry that happens at like the atmosphere ocean interface, like the first foot of air above the ocean and the first foot of water at the top of the ocean. There's very interesting chemistry that happens right in that.
Okay.
Like, I was not a chemist, but this lady had a grant, and I went up to her and was just like, can I work in your lab? I will do absolutely anything if you pay me in cash. Like, literally, I'll mop the floors. What do you need? And she was just like, sure. You seem like a go-getter. At the time, I was a medical microbiology major. So like viruses, not atmospheric nanochemistry. And over the course of 3 or 4 years, I was in her lab. She slowly started giving me more and more and more. And it ended up becoming, I had a whole project, right? And I was allowed to, design that project, run all of the experiments, publish the data, be an author on those papers, attend international and national meetings and present my work, even though I was just a student from another department in another lab, in another group. And it was just the most fantastic experience. And I loved and got very much addicted to the act of performing science. And then was 100% sure I was going to go to medical school after this experience. I was like, oh, this sounds amazing. And there was a group from the University of Washington in Seattle, big D1 school, that goes to sub-Saharan Africa every other summer and spends the entire summer there and treats people for malaria and all kinds of wild worm-based disorders and these types of things, and goes in and provides basically free medical care. And I was like, oh, this will look great on my resume. So I applied to be one of the helpers for this group and got in. And so I spent the entire summer of 2003 in Kenya and Tanzania, came back and realized, oh my gosh, I don't want to be a physician. People make me very sad because there were some, particularly some of the young children that we saw there that who were sick with things that in the US, we would have had a drug to treat you for, but we hadn't brought it. We brought things we were expecting to see, but there were some children who presented with disorders that were treatable, but we didn't have the drugs with us because we weren't expecting to see that. And knowing that these kids were very likely going to die because they weren't going to have access to these medications, or they had a disease that had no medication, was really heavy. And I don't think I was equipped to handle that weight. I was basically pre-med at that point. I was like, what am I going to do with these credits? And so I talked to my professor, Dr. Johansson, and she's just like, well, you could go get a PhD instead of an MD, and you could develop medicines, but without actually having to interface with patients, and kind of work in the background. And I was like, oh, that sounds like maybe a good idea. And so I pivoted and decided that I would do a PhD instead. And so that began that phase of the trajectory. Yep. But I still would have never thought I was necessarily going to become a gene therapist. That was not something that was taught in my undergrad. But I knew I liked viruses, joined my PhD lab, which was a world famous stem cell biology lab, not a virology lab. And they're like, what do you want to work on? And I'm like, viruses.
Viruses.
Work on stem cells, sweet pea. And I'm like, no, but I want to work on viruses. And they're like, what if you work on viruses that infect stem cells or something? And I was like, okay, maybe there's something here. And right at about this time was when the viral gene therapy field was kind of crashing in on itself. And here I was, this just bright-eyed, bushy-tailed young grad student who was just like,
me.
Great, I love it. And my PhD advisor had to just sit me down and be like, I literally, legally cannot give you money to work on these projects. I am not allowed by the NIH to fund these types of things. And, the little future CEO in me was like, well, what if I went and found some money that wasn't NIH money to work on it? Could I do it? And he's just like, where are you going to find money? You're a grad student. And I was like, but what if I did? And he's like, sure. If you found money, you can work on it. But in the meantime, I need you to work on things I'm allowed to fund. And so fast forward 4 years of PhD later, to this day, I believe, anyone from OHSU in Portland can check me in the comments. If I'm wrong, I believe I still hold the record for most scholarships, fellowships, and grants won to a graduate student in the medical school ever. And I went out and I found money from just the most randomest places you can ever imagine. And so finally, my PhD advisor was just like, okay, go play in the corner with viruses for like, go ahead. And that became like the beginning of the obsession. And during that time of my PhD was when gene therapy actually started to become really hot again. And so then I finished my PhD. There was very minimal kind of foundational work in the space at that point because folks had kind of needed to pivot away to like genomics and other related spaces. And so there was a lot of like really key fundamental papers that needed to kind of be written. And so they were there for the taking. We were able to kind of fill that gap and publish all of that. And then started my postdoc. And at like maybe year 2 of my postdoc at Stanford was when like the world heard about it. Like that's when like on the 5 o'clock news, like your parents were like, "Have you heard about gene therapy?" Right? It broke through and managed to get to like the masses. And that was about the second year of my postdoc. And so by the time I finished my postdoc 2 more years later, that was like the height of the paranoia moment around it. But there was no one ahead of me, right? Because there had been no field prior to that. Everyone had needed to pivot away because of the FDA holds and NIH holds and these types of things, right? There were no assistant professors of gene therapy or associate professors of gene therapy, right? There was no one ahead of us to kind of set the stage. And there was like, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 postdocs at that time kind of finishing up their academic studies at like the height of this moment. And so we, despite our, very young age, got to really kind of lay the foundation for the field that has kind of become what it has become. And so we got to have really a pretty outsized impact, despite being, brand new postdocs going out and interviewing for faculty positions and getting grants and these types of things. And so that became like the beginning of my lab. Did a year at Stanford and then moved up to UCSF here in San Francisco. And one of the projects that we worked on in my lab was what I saw as like one of the big challenges in the field was the fact that every AAV gene therapy company or group on Earth can only be used to treat one disease. Because you can't use it to treat something else because of the way we design these payloads to be very, very, very disease specific. And so we started this project that we lovingly referred to as the Universal Payloads Project, where we were like, oh, well, let's see if we could come up with payloads that could treat more than one thing. Had no intentions or plans or grand visions that like this was going to lead us into the oncology space in cancer. And fast forward 7 years of work, and we were entirely working on oncology. And we started presenting at grand rounds and tumor board at UCSF, and all of our clinical colleagues were like, you might want to spin out. This is like pretty good data. And that was the first moment. And that was like at the peak of COVID, when you were still like Lysoling off your bags of chips that you had Instacarted to your door and like left on your doorstep before you would touch them. I told myself I wouldn't do anything unless I was sure I could get some money. Went out, attempted to raise, managed to get a very nice seed, $6 million from Founders Fund, which was like enough to go out and be dangerous and get started. And so decided to actually resign from academia and become a CEO to actually like run with this project. But a lot of it was also very much motivated by the fact that UCSF was a public institution, unlike our sister university, right, like Stanford, 20 minutes away south of us, that's private. Right? Because we were public, we were not allowed to go back to work. So it was like 9 months. I was banned from campus, from my own lab, from doing our own work, these types of things. And I was just so frustrated that as a virologist, I was not allowed to go in. But all of my friends who were out in industry and who had startups were like, oh, well, we're essential workers. We just have to wear masks and be 6 feet apart. And I was like, this sounds great. Like,
I'll go and do that then.
And I was like, well, I guess I could start a company. And so it was not like this was the grand vision. It was the combination of our clinical colleagues saying, this is really good data. This could be a company. And the moment in time of it being COVID and realizing we're going to fall behind scientifically if we keep waiting for academia to open back up to let us do our research. But like we could literally move across the street. There was like an incubator across the street. Full of faculty startups. I applied to get space in the incubator and I got it. We went out and tried to get some funds and we got it. And it was just like all the stars were aligned. And I was like, I think this is the moment. And so quite literally put everything on carts and like wheeled it across the street and started SIREN. I don't know that SIREN would exist if it hadn't have been for COVID and the restrictions about being able to be on campus and do work. So in some sense, SIREN owes its existence to COVID, even though we're not a COVID company or a vaccine company.
You'll be one of those people that in, history books in years to come, where there's like, what came from COVID that wouldn't exist if it, and you'll be like, my company.
I don't know that we would have existed. I think we would have kept doing really cool science, really cool, transformative stuff, but I think we would have stayed in academia.
Sure. Just the short time I've
a really good motivator.
Yeah, just the short time I've known you, Nicole. Something would have started. I don't think there'd be any danger of that. So, what was your transition like into that of a CEO? Obviously, from what you said, is you're out there as an undergrad getting money, so that's pretty much the big part of a CEO, right? Is like, where am I getting funding for things? But what did you find? Was it what you expected? What were the challenges that you faced?
It was simultaneously exactly the same as being a professor and completely and utterly unrelated and different from being a professor at the exact same time, right? Like the jobs of being a professor and the job of being CEO are very similar, right? Your number one, most important, like the role is find the money. Find it. Doesn't matter where you find it. Find it. Doesn't matter if it's grants. It doesn't matter if it's philanthropic donors. It doesn't matter if it's like discounts from vendors. It doesn't matter if it's grants from the federal government or the state or the city or the county.
Or bank robbery.
It doesn't matter. You find a bag of cash on like the sidewalk, take it. Like just find the money to make the science happen. So that is exactly the same. How you might do it and the mechanisms by which you might do it and the timelines with which you might do it are a little bit different, but that underlying role is exactly the same. It's just find the money. The next couple of things that you do, be working on something so important and interesting that the absolute best people in the world want to come work with you. That is the same in academia as it is in industry. Get the gnarly roadblocks out of your people's way so that they can go do the best possible science. That's exactly the same. Go out and evangelize your story and tell the world why it is the most interesting science that has ever existed and why they should be super pumped about it. That is the exact same thing. So many of the key fundamental component parts of being a professor and being a CEO are exactly the same. The big differences are that there's a whole lot less bureaucracy as a CEO. I don't sit on committees deciding, whatever, what the journal club is going to present next week at the department seminar and these types of things, right? So there's a lot less bureaucracy and the pace is much faster because you're usually not working, with a lab of 50 students on 50 different projects that are purposefully not competitive so that each person can grow into their own unique kind of scientist. It's everyone's working on one project and they're all, working in lockstep together to kind of achieve this one kind of shared goal. So it's much more team oriented, much more like a team sport. Harking back to kind of that importance of, the things that you do in your youth can still be very valuable to you as an adult.
Absolutely.
And so I think there were a lot of shared things, but the pace was super different. The focus was super different. The sum of the skills that you need as a CEO are quite unique right now. There is no infrastructure, right? Like in academia, thank goodness, and timely with things happening this week as it pertains to NIH indirects and these types of things, right? There is infrastructure in academia that doesn't exist out in industry. Right.
Yep.
Someone is paying for the rent in your building. Someone is keeping the lights on. Someone is paying, the biohazard team to come and take your red biohazard, waste and go dispose of it properly. Someone got a permit from the city and the county and the state and the federal government, and possibly even your university in order for you to order that controlled substance that you might need to knock out an animal to do a surgery, right? Someone got those permits.
Yep.
You didn't have to do that as a professor. But out in industry, right, there is no infrastructure. It's just, you got to do everything. And you may not even know the things that you might need.
Yep.
And so learning on the fly and during COVID, what might be needed, particularly from, maybe someone at the health department, you're like, what permits would we need to work with this virus in this lab? And they're like, oh, I don't know. we're drowning in COVID. So it was,
we're remote. We don't know.
It was also, remember when the word, supply chain was the buzzword, started the company. And we had all this money. We had $6 million from Founders Fund. And we were so pumped, and we were placing all these orders. We're like, I need a centrifuge, and I need all of, a tissue culture hood and all these things. And they're like, awesome. We'll deliver them to you in a year. We're like, wait, what? And they're like, yeah, all that stuff is being diverted to like all the vaccine manufacturers, or the critical, special, very unique plastic that is used in the cannulas for that like surgical device. We can't get access to that because that's being made in Switzerland, and all of the plastic being shipped out of Switzerland is like stuck in customs. And you're like, what? So it was wild trying to find a way to do science when like we had no stuff. So we got super creative, just like asking other companies, like, can we go run a sample on your instrument? Or, outsourcing it to CROs that happen to be open, and just finding a way to be really, really, really cost efficient and like capital efficient, but like not money capital, but like stuff capital.
Yeah.
And just finding
ways. Go back to the bartering days almost, isn't it?
More with less. And thankfully, I think, that, starting something during a crisis, forces you to become a very different, whatever, scientist, CEO, whatever your role is. Yep. It forces you to become a very unique thing. And we've kept that now, even though, not that we should say that the COVID crisis is over. There's still very much COVID going around. But I think the crisis part of it has largely subsided. But we've maintained that like very much like thrifty perspective and resilient perspective, and like just find a way, be creative. There doesn't have to be a way. You might have to invent a way, but find a way. And I think that's one of the reasons we have survived the greater macroeconomic crisis that like biotech is having, it regardless of your space. It doesn't matter if you're in small molecules or biologics, antibodies or ADCs or cell therapies or gene therapies. It doesn't matter, right? Everyone is having a hard time fundraising unless you're an AI company. And I think one of the ways we have survived this is because we have been so resilient and we stayed very small, right? We didn't overhire. We didn't get too much space. We didn't we didn't fill our plate with more than we could eat. And I think that kind of capital efficiency has served us very well in a way that we weren't planning on it to be. It was just because, right, we were born during a crisis. And so that like indelible mark is just on us forever. Yeah. And we've survived and thrived. And, what's wild is had I known what was going to happen in academia, right? Like the last couple of weeks with like the whole NIH grant crisis and what all of that means. I'm actually quite glad that I went out to industry, because I think we will be able to possibly weather this, like anti-science storm a little bit better than perhaps some of our academic colleagues are going to be able to with the NIH stuff and everything that's going to happen. So it might have actually been more prescient than I realized even at the time.
And that's interesting because I saw one of your posts a few weeks ago. It's like, oh, this is great when you spend your Christmas vacations writing 3 grants for such and such. And I was like, oh God, what is that going to mean? And obviously there are still things working through and there are still things going on and stuff like that. But as an immediate impact, what is that going to have on SIREN, if anything?
SIREN, probably nothing, right? We're resilient. We have VC money in the banks. We're fine financially. It just really means we're going to have to change, right? Even though we have VC dollars in the bank, I love non-dilutive money. It's the best money. So we still write grants, right? So thankfully, all of those years having been in academia still served me well because we still write grants like crazy, even though we're not in academia, because it's just fantastic non-dilutive money. So we write federal grants, but also state grants and grants from like the city and the county and grants from vendors and grants from big pharma. And we write grants to absolutely anyone. If I see someone at the gas station saying that they have grant, like I will apply for it because I like non-dilutive money. So even if the NIH budgets get refocused and get trimmed, we'll largely probably just shift our focus away from writing things like NIH grants and more towards things like Department of Defense grants. Most folks don't actually know this, but like fast fact, the Department of Defense funds a lot of cancer research, like on par with what the National Cancer Institute from the NIH does, because many of many of our servicemen and women come down with cancer from, things like they're exposed to in the battlefield and these types of things. So the Department of Defense actually funds a lot of cancer research. And so we will likely just pivot the places where we apply and spend our grant writing time on. Obviously, I do not want the NIH budget, even if it doesn't affect SIREN immediately in any way. It affects the whole of the world because we want dollars being spent on both basic and translational research, both at the NIH as well as the NSF. It doesn't have to be immediately health relevant for it to be important for humanity. Like studying ecologies of, ecosystems is wildly important. So I obviously want all science to be well funded and as much as it can. And so hopefully, I'm hopeful. I say this with like bated breath. I am hopeful that continued dialogue and perhaps seeing some of the immediate repercussions of like, oh gosh, we didn't realize that money was going to that. That's actually something quite useful. And maybe they'll kind of walk back some of these things. And or the courts can help to ensure that we maintain funding for the science that really maintains U.S. as the world's leader in just about any science, you name it. We're kind of the world's leader of this. And it's a great source of, I think, American pride and should be, regardless of party. So I'm hopeful that, there's going to be chaos. Like the next 6 months are going to be absolute pandemonium level chaos. No matter what your political affiliation, it doesn't matter. Like it's going to be chaos for everyone as it pertains to science and these types of things. So I think one of the biggest pieces of advice I would give to anyone who's listening to this, who's like, what advice would you have for someone coming up or who's changing fields or who's whatevering, is to just kind of be calm and resilient. Things will happen today that 2 days later are going to get walked back. And then 2 days after that, there's going to be a lawsuit. And then 2 days after that, there's going to be, some judges will stay the ruling. And then 2 days after that, there's going to be an appeal. And then 2 days after that, some other thing will happen that will affect this. And, it's one of those, if all you do is sit on your phone all day and you panic about what's happening out in the greater world, you're not going to get anything meaningful done.
Nothing
that doesn't
done.
mean you'll hide your head in the sand, right? We need everybody to be involved in communicating to the world the importance of science. But it means don't spend 4 hours doom scrolling and getting yourself anxious. Execute. Go show the world why your science is important. And if that means for the very first time ever, starting a social media account and telling people about your science in layman's terms, and acting like a snooty scientist and academic and using big acronyms and words, talk to people the way we are talking. Just be authentic, be real, talk to people about your science. Talk to people at coffee shops, talk to people on social media, get on a podcast, find a stage, find an open mic night at a bar where you can talk about anything and just talk to people about your science, and let the world know in their terms, in layman's terms, why your science
it's important.
And just try as best as you can to not participate in the hype cycle, because it's going to be wild for the next 6 months. Try to steel yourself, stay calm. That doesn't mean you can't have a 20-minute spot on your calendar where you just go stand in a broom closet and scream. But for the most part, keep your composure, stay calm, stay the course, just keep doing your stuff, and just be resilient. And even if there's no path forward, something gets blocked, something gets made illegal, something, whatever, the rules change, the permits change, the something changed, and it makes it difficult for you to do your work or your science. Take a deep breath and find a way. You have to find a way. You just have to.
Fantastic piece of advice.
You have to find a way.
And I think that's the important thing, isn't it? As you were saying, you can sit and doom scroll all day, and all it will do is raise your blood pressure and cause palpitations and things like that. But it's about, where am I going? Where's the journey for my company, for what we want to achieve? And let's stay on the path and keep to that. And let the kind of craziness go on around, but staying the course. It was interesting what you said about people having social media accounts and talking about their science, because that's something that I've been very much with clients and with prospects that I talk to. in all the years that I've been in the recruitment industry, and certainly since social media thing's been around, this sector is probably the worst for promoting what it's all about. People don't post. I see very little on LinkedIn. And the stuff I do see tends to be from the same people consistently getting their message across, which I think, well, that's where investors see it. And that's where, employees or future employees, as you were saying, you want the top talent in the world to come work for you. They need to know who you are and what it is you do. And it's getting that message out there. So I certainly think there's a value in saying to the scientific community, to the bio community, get out there and tell people about the fabulous stuff you're doing and let people know. So,
well, understanding the reach that social media has across the different platforms, right? In the same day, I might take the same content post, like we published a paper and we want to tell the world about it. I will post a very different post about that paper on LinkedIn than I would on Twitter.
Yeah.
Right? Because they are talking to different audiences.
Yeah.
The LinkedIn one is more to like future employees, other scientists, and investors. Twitter is to the whole of the world.
Yeah.
And the whole of the world will respond, right? So you use not only different language, but you'll highlight different things. And so I encourage folks to go out and talk to folks in different arenas. Go give a public lecture at like your local science academy, right? Like all major cities for the most part have one. Right here in San Francisco, we've got the Exploratorium and we've got the California Academy of Sciences, and you can go give talks there, right? You can give a talk at a university, even if you're not a professor. If you just like ping a university and you're like, can I come talk about my science? They will be like, yes, we love speakers. We'll even buy pizza. Right? Like you can go talk, there'll be like science nights at like local bars and you like talk science over beers. There are many places in San Francisco that have like Ask a Scientist night, and they will have scientists there and like there will be pictures of beer and you can just talk about science. You can go on Instagram, you can go on Twitter, you can go on Facebook. Like there are all these different places to talk about things. And I think the key is knowing who you're talking to and making sure that you use the right like language and visuals and these types of things for the audience you're talking to. So it doesn't seem like you're talking over people.
Yeah.
Meet people where they are, use language that they're going to understand and resonate with, and just be super authentic about your stuff. And, right. What is the famous, I think it's Richard Feynman, the quote, the best people are teachers because they understand how to talk to people. And if you don't know how to explain it, you're the one who doesn't understand it, not the people that you're.
Not the people.
So talking about your science, even if you're the world's leading expert in it, to like normal everyday folk that are walking around on the street, makes you realize how much you don't know about your topic. And like, they'll ask you like these profound questions that you're like, it's like when a little kid is like, why is the sky blue? And you're like, light refraction. That's not my area of science. And like all of a sudden you realize that like you don't understand this thing because someone asked you a very basic but yet very profound question. So I think folks now more than ever, right, we need to explain to everyone, not just other scientists, but everyone, what we're doing and why it's important and why it's awesome and why it will benefit them. And some of it will be short term. This is why it benefits you immediately. And some of it will be very long term. Like we need to study why this moss grows on this rock. And it's going to take us 50 years, but it's important, and explain why. And I think we need to get better about engaging with the public about what we do and why
what it is you're doing. Yeah.
Yeah.
That also tends to take away the science fear, doesn't it? If you're talking to real people about real challenges in a way that they can understand it, I think helps to diminish some of the conspiracy theories and other things that circulate in the sector. So what does the future look like for SIREN? Where are you at your stage of development?
Particularly given like all of the political landscape that's happening. We are like literally yesterday, we just submit what's called our pre-IND packet to the FDA asking for a meeting, right? Normally you submit it, 30 days later, you'll find out if you got a meeting, and then you'll have the meeting with them. You'll get the feedback, and then you'll run your IND enabling animal studies. And if that data packet looks good when you submit it to them, then you get the green light to run your clinical
to start
trial.
your trials. Yep.
So we're like right at the transition from being a translational company into being a clinical stage company. We're hoping to be able to start the clinical trial in like Q1 of next year. And actually see if this concept of a universal AAV gene therapy, right? SIREN is unique because we're kind of two worlds firsts. We're the first AAV gene therapy in cancer, right? Normally, we only ever use AAV gene therapy to go after rare, what are called Mendelian monogenic disorders. It just means you have a single genetic defect in one gene, and if we just correct that defect by giving you a functional copy of that gene, then we would essentially cure your disease. And so we could treat you one time with a virus that expresses a copy of that gene, and like you'll be cured forever. And that's how every other AAV gene therapy on Earth works.
Right.
And we're weird because we're not doing that. We wanted to make an AAV where we wouldn't have to change the actual, like the medicine payload that's inside of it. And it could be used to treat dozens or hundreds or thousands of different diseases. And we're pointing the ship at cancer first. And so we have just one virus that could potentially use to treat any cancer. And so it's the first AAV gene therapy in cancer, and it's the first AAV gene therapy that can be used to treat more than one thing. So we actually really want FDA's feedback on how they're going to treat us, right? Are we an AAV gene therapy, or are we an oncology drug? Or are we both? Or are we some new category that doesn't even exist and we just started it? And they're going to have new requests and asks of us. We don't know. And so we actually really want the FDA's guidance and support and feedback in this as we like navigate this very unique world's first path of putting an AAV into a tumor for the first time, right? No one's ever done that before.
Right.
So we are going to figure this out in real time, live with the world this year.
Well, I look forward to being part of that journey to hear what it's all about. Well, listen, Nicole, it's been so fascinating hearing your story, and you are clearly very, very passionate about what you do, and I have no doubts that whatever funding you need is coming. It will come if you're standing on a street corner with a bucket. That people will give you money. That's no question at all. And I wish you and SIREN every success.
We'll take every cheerleader we can get.
I'll be there cheering from LinkedIn.
I love it.
Good to meet you. Take good care and enjoy the rest of your day.
You as well.
Take care. Bye-bye.
That wraps up today's episode of She Leads Biotech. I hope you enjoyed this conversation and found inspiration in the stories shared. Remember, the success of every woman can inspire another, so don't hesitate to share yours. She Leads Biotech is brought to you by CNA International USA, a woman-owned boutique search firm specializing in sourcing talent for small and emerging bioscience companies across the US, from our headquarters in New York. For more information about our services, feel free to reach out at contact@cnaint.com. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And until next time, stay bold, stay brilliant, and continue pioneering progress for women in bioscience.